Welcome to Carnegie Europe, dear ambassadors and dignitaries, dear representatives of the European institutions and NATO, dear members of the International Press Corps, colleagues, dear Bundesminister Steinmeier. It's fantastic to have you all here to talk today about one of the big red-hot issues on the European agenda. Apart from all of the stuff that comes to us from the outside and the inside, of course, Germany is always an issue to talk about and has become more of an issue to talk about over the last couple of years. And it is arguably one of the hot issues of European geopolitics over the last 2,000 years. And so we are only standing on the tip of a huge iceberg underneath us of history and tradition of discussion about the role of Germany. I would like to start with a little bit of an anecdote, as they tell you to do, actually. And this is an anecdote about a person that plays a big role and used to play a big role in German foreign policy and has become a symbol both for good and for bad for many of German foreign policy. And that person is Egon Bahr, whom some of you might know, and of course who's one of the historically most influential foreign policy advisors in German history. And he worked for Willy Brandt at the height of Ostpolitik in the 1970s, of course. And one day Bahr was, rushing out of the chancellery to a service car, and because he needed to get some event that he needed to attend, and he gets into the car and says to the driver, "Okay, let's go." And the driver turns around and says, "Okay, but where to?" And Bahr says, "Doesn't matter, they need me everywhere." That's an old anecdote, I guess, but I think it's important for us in two ways today. Because first of all, it seems to kind of illustrate where German foreign policy stands at the moment. Germany is needed everywhere. It is confident enough to accept that role. It is willing to rush to the scene, but it is not always clear where it actually wants to go. And secondly, this anecdote is important because it helps us understand how different the situation is from back then, especially in terms of confidence. Back then, West Germany, a country of limited sovereignty, clearly punched above its weight and was very much aware of the fact that it was writing history at the time. And even those who were critical of Ostpolitik and who didn't like it very much had no illusions about the fact that it was absolutely eminent and super important. Today, it's different. Today, a fully sovereign, reunited country, multilaterally committed and much in demand, is expected to play a role that is commensurate with its new size and its new geographical location in Europe as a united country. But it does not always know what that means and how to do it. But it is also a country, and this is why the confidence issue comes in here, a country that has the confidence to do the rarest of things, which is to question itself. And this is, ladies and gentlemen, what Frank-Walter Steinmeier has done over the last year or so. Apart from Ukraine and Syria and Iran and Ebola, and of course a little bit of the Euro crisis, he also did what no one else has really ever done before, and that is to ask the world, as the foreign minister, what was wrong with the foreign policy of his own country, publicly, with everybody, invited to give his or her take. He invited analysts and academics and elder statesmen to hand him the report card, essentially, on the foreign policy that he himself had helped to shape in one way or another over a decade. And then he asked the German public to do the same thing. And then he took it all back home into the German foreign ministry to discuss it with his diplomats. And this, when you look at it, is actually pretty much unheard of. And I don't remember any other foreign minister having done such a thing ever. And it requires confidence to invite the stones to be thrown at oneself. And I think Minister Steinmeier deserves a lot of credit for that. Not only had he the guts to do so, but he also actually continued to do so, and including all of the numerous town hall meetings and discussions at universities and speeches and discussion rounds during a time when his schedule was brimful with global crisis management. And we all know how easy it would have been for him to just, not go to these meetings, to delegate it to somebody and to silently let the process fall asleep. But he didn't do that. And Minister Steinmeier deserves the International Think Tank Badge of Honor for the fact that he did what all of us in this wonderful business consider the thing closest to heaven, to discuss strategy for a full year on taxpayers' money. We at Carnegie Europe have followed this process very closely. We have even been part of it. We hosted a workshop at the German Foreign Ministry in the end of 2013, and some Carnegie scholars from this office and from others were even invited to contribute to the essay series that was published and launched as part of this review process, and we're very thankful for the invitations that we've received. And now, just as the rest of this town, we, as Carnegie, are very curious what came out of this process. What have you learned? What are your takeaways? Experts everywhere have been discussing this new German question, as some call it, feverishly. And every step that you have taken, Minister Steinmeier, and also Chancellor Merkel, of course, has been discussed and interpreted and dissected. And you have been, as a result of this, commended and praised, but you have also been accused of being too soft, to exercise appeasement even, and to be naive. You have even been personally compared to some very nasty historical figures, which I know is something that you don't take very lightly, which, by the way, I like that it bothers you still, that you're not that Teflon and you just don't let it drop off, but that it matters to you, and I think it's a sign that you care. In any case, today you're here to share with us what your takeaways are, and for once in my life as a think tanker, it is not an exaggeration when I say that you are exactly the right kind of person that we need to talk about the issue at hand. Minister Steinmeier, thank you very much for coming. The floor is yours.
Lieber Jan Techau, dear guests of Carnegie, ladies and gentlemen, thank you first of all for this very warm welcome. I'm really grateful for your kind invitation to Carnegie Europe, not only because I look forward to our discussion, but also because I'm happy to do more in Brussels than just the usual council meetings. You would be surprised, I may come to Brussels quite often, but the only building I really know is named Justus Lipsius. And that's a little bit like saying, yes, I've been to the pyramids, but I only saw the parking lot. When I come to Brussels as the German Foreign Minister, there are two basic messages I bring. First, when I think about German foreign policy, I think European. German foreign policy must be European. And second, the other way around, when I think about Europe, I think foreign policy. I think about Europe in the world, and let me, in the next 10-15 minutes, a little bit explain both of these thoughts in turn. Jan Techau already mentioned my review of German foreign policy. There are two reasons why I started this process now around about 15 months ago. Firstly, the world is changing fundamentally. The tectonic plates of international politics are shifting. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, at the same time, Germany's role in the world is changing. We are faced with big expectations. And if you want to hear an example, here is one of them. One expert wrote to us that Germany must, and I quote him, that Germany must build bridges between North and South. That Germany must Europeanize Russia, and that Germany must multilateralize the United States. Easier said than done, I'm afraid, but guess where the expert was from? Not from France, not from Poland for sure, but from India. So we face growing challenges and growing expectations. And that's why when I speak of German responsibility, I don't mean that Germany is searching for more responsibility. I think we simply have it. Our review process started on a simple question, and you quoted it. What is wrong with German foreign policy? Or to be honest, the question was, what, if anything, is wrong with German foreign policy? We worked through that in three phases. In phase one, we asked the experts, academics, as well as practitioners from Germany and abroad, including many European friends. In phase two, we debated, indeed, with the German public. we try to reach beyond the usual suspects of foreign policy. Because, let's be honest, those who deal with foreign affairs on a daily basis in Berlin and in Brussels do so in pretty exclusive circles. Our goal is, and was, to break that up. Defining Germany's responsibility in the world is not something that elites can decide on. It has to be negotiated at the heart of the society. That's why I personally and the leadership of the Foreign Office in Germany went out to listen and to explain. We held more than 60 events throughout Germany and across Europe, and we tried new formats. A lot of them online, but also in the form of town hall meetings or even in workshops, which were very interesting because in workshops where we simulated real-life foreign policy decisions with the normal people. Phase 3, finally, meant taking stock within our own organization. All Foreign Office staff were called on to re-examine their daily routines. Some of them didn't quite believe it. The people at the top want to know what I really think? Yes, we did mean it. We wanted change, and we identified a whole range of measures that we are now going to put into practice. The results of our review are printed in this wonderful, lovely brochure, and I will take the remaining 45 minutes to read it out to you. No, I won't. Anyone who hasn't enough of German foreign policy after tonight can pick one up by the door. Just very briefly, the three main areas of our results were the following. The first is expectations. The review revealed a big drift. The world expects a lot of German foreign policy, something, and remember this example with this Indian expert, some of them too much. But if you ask the German public if they want their country to get more involved in the world, 60% of them say, no, thanks. That is the rift that German foreign policy has to overcome, and it has a lot to do with improving, for instance, our communication about foreign policy in Germany. The second area is crisis and order. The current accumulation of international crises, from Ukraine to ISIS, is perhaps not a coincidence. It is symptomatic of a world where the structures of international order are eroding. But as a globally connected society and an export-based economy, Germany, more than others, depends on a functioning rules-based order. That's why we, more than others, need to manage two things at once. Improving, on the one side, our crisis resilience, and strengthening, on the other side, the international order. The third question concerns our policy instruments. Far too often, people think foreign policy has only two options. Either idle diplomatic chit-chat or military intervention. Our review and our current political engagement prove the opposite, that the foreign policy toolbox is much broader and that we need to make use of the whole spectrum, of the whole content of this toolbox. These three areas had a lot of debate and controversy, but one thing was striking. across all controversies, there was one message that everybody agreed on. German foreign policy only works in and through Europe. We saw that in all three areas. First, the issue of crisis. If it is true that international crises are going to be the norm rather than the exception, then we need to strengthen Europe's resilience as a whole. Especially with regard to our neighborhood, to the east and to the south, the more European our instruments of crisis reaction are, the more effective they will be. And that's not theory. It is tested every day in practice. Take the Ukraine crisis. Our greatest strength in this crisis has been and continues to be our ability to act jointly. Our unified positions and joint declarations led by the High Representatives, our decisions about instruments for increasing political pressure taken by the FAC or the European Council, or our negotiations in the Normandy format in close coordination with the EAS, all these steps rest on a European foundation. Second, ladies and gentlemen, the issue of order. To us, the European Union is the first and foremost frame of reference for international order. The European Union is the world's most sophisticated example of a regional order, and as such, we need to defend it. And only as such, we can bring our full weight to bear on the global order. In practice, that means the United Nations. We should make our European voice heard in the United Nations and its organizations, and we must get better at coordinating it. I'll take an example from a very different context, TTIP. If we do it right, then TTIP will not just be a free trade agreement, but a major chance for Europe and the United States to set the tone for the future globalization, to set economic and social standards for an interconnected world. And finally, what I call the European reflex. To me, that's a key result of the review process. German foreign policy needs to strengthen its European reflex on a very practical, everyday level. I'm talking about what we are calling in Germany in the Foreign Ministry Ministervorlagen, Querschnittsreferenten, Staatssekretärsrunden. I know this sounds like the deep quagmire of German bureaucracy, but it's exactly the bread and butter business where the European reflex must operate. So much about the review process. It confirmed to me once more, when I think about foreign policy, I think about Europe. But now, let me turn it around. When I think about Europe, I think about foreign policy. That seems strange, but there is a truth in it. Last year, as a foreign minister, I traveled 385,000 kilometers. That is the exact distance from here to the moon. So one day when I'm out of this job, maybe I qualify as an astronaut. Anyway, in all my travels as foreign minister, I get to feel one real privilege. I get to look at Europe through the eyes of the world. And that's a remarkable experience. Last year, for instance, I went to Angola, early in the year, I think, around about April. And I met young people there who told me, we want to build a society where education is for everyone, not only for a just few at the top. And when they said that, they said, just like you in Europe. Only some weeks ago, I met students in Tunis who said, we want to build a society where we can say what we want and live like we want. And when they said that, they said Europe. They even said Balad Europa, meaning the country Europe. That means Europe looks far more attractive from the outside than it often feels from the inside in news talk shows or in populist slogans. People inside Europe have come to think of Europe in numbers, like deficits, financial rescues, bond markets, or whatever. People outside Europe see Europe as a model of society, a society where freedom and solidarity go together. I think we need to find back to that perspective. We need to strengthen the global perspective in European politics, because that perspective gives us the strongest argument for a unified Europe. If we want the European model to matter in the world, then we have to stick together. If the 28 states of Europe want to have a weight in the world, then only as one. But let's be honest, our instruments and our decision-making processes are far away from that. As a banking union, as a capital markets union, as an economic union, Europe has made progress in recent years, but not enough as a foreign and security union. So we need to add to our toolbox. We need to improve our processes. Above all, we need to align our perspectives on the responsibility we have in this world. For all that, the current process leading to a new European foreign and security policy strategy is a perfect opportunity from my point of view. Federica Mogherini saw that from day one, and her leadership has my full support. What are the areas we need to work on? You saw that Jean-Claude Juncker, for instance, just renewed the idea of a European army, not for tomorrow, but as a vision. Yes, we should exploit the full potential for integration that the Lisbon Treaty gives us. But to be honest, a vision is not enough. We need step-by-step progress. So let's improve the state of our institutions as they are now in the fields of common security and defense. Let's improve the planning and the conduct of our missions and operations. For example, by creating a permanent civilian military planning and conduct capability in Brussels. However, what I said about our German review also holds on the European level. Foreign and security policy is a lot more than the military aspect. It's the diplomatic toolbox again. It's crisis prevention, mediation, development, and economic cooperation, financial instruments, and so on. Making the toolbox bigger and making it better is what the new strategy should do. In short, making the comprehensive approach work. The External Action Service has already done a lot. Take the early warning system, take the new crisis management structures, or take the Algiers talks on Mali, where the EAS brings in its expertise in mediation. And most importantly, we are about to reset our neighborhood policy, making it less bureaucratic, more flexible, more tailored to our neighbors' interests. In short, let's make our neighborhood policy more political. And finally, let me say a word about the Foreign Affairs Council. It should be the place where we develop one common view of our joint responsibility, rather than just deliver individual statements of national interest. At the Council, the game shouldn't be me taking on 27, it should be 28 taking on the world. Responsibility is the key word in all this, and it's a long way on both sides. Yes, national foreign policy, also German foreign policy, must not only think European, but be willing to act European. That can only happen when on the European level we are able and willing not just to talk and coordinate, but to really define and carry a European responsibility in the world. With that in mind, we should think about the issues that are making headlines these days. I see many journalists here in the room, and I know what they might ask. Minister, if you are focusing on Europe's foreign policy, does that mean that Europe's internal affairs are less important? Of course not. But my point is, let's not think one without the other. Let's remember that foreign policy begins at home. Europe can only be strong on the outside if the inside architecture is solid. The European model of freedom and solidarity can only stand out in the world if it is alive inside. Let's keep that in mind in our current debates. To take one example, I cannot imagine what the values, the reputation, and the strengths of European foreign policy would come to if Great Britain weren't part of it. And also, I cannot imagine what would happen to our outside credibility and outside effectiveness if Greece left the euro. And with these two thoughts, I hope we are left with enough things to discuss now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Steinmeier, for running us through the review process, but also giving us a couple of bigger thoughts on the future of Europe. Let me start with a very basic question. You ran us through that document and you gave us the 3 fields of change where you think they are most needed and as the conclusion of the debate. Are you now happy with the level of ambition that comes out of that document? Is it the right size? Is it the right size for this Germany that is now in such big demand?
Da gibt es 2 Dimensionen, eine die innere und eine die äußere. Was die innere Dimension angeht, bin ich sehr zufrieden. Ich glaube, dieser Prozess des letzten Jahres hat etwas aufgebrochen im eigenen Haus, im Außenministerium. Und das Entscheidende ist, dass sich auch Kulturen verändern, dass sie moderner werden, dass grenzüberschreitend und zuständigkeitsüberschreitend gearbeitet wird, mit Blick auf die neuen Herausforderungen, zu denen ich ein paar Beispiele genannt habe.
Well, 2 dimensions come into play, an internal dimension but also an external dimension. As far as the internal dimension is concerned, I must say that I'm very satisfied indeed. The process that was started last year has brought about change in my ministry at home in the Foreign Office. And it is crucial in light of the fact that cultures are changing, trans-border issues come into play, cross-border issues come into play. So with view of these challenges, I must say this was crucial indeed.
Nach außen hin ist das schwerer zu beantworten. Und ich knüpfe nochmal an die Erhebung, die eine Stiftung für uns gemacht hat, und zu dem Ergebnis kam, dass 70% der Deutschen eigentlich der Meinung sind, Deutschland solle nicht mehr Verantwortung übernehmen. Das kann man vielleicht historisch erklären, aber es ist natürlich auch ein Reflex auf die Vielzahl der Krisen, die uns gegenwärtig begegnen und die jeden Abend eine Welt, eine bebilderte Welt in die privaten Haushalte bringen, die einen eher erschrecken lassen.
As far as the external dimension is concerned, well, this is a more difficult question to answer. Let me get back to what I just mentioned in my speech pertaining to the survey that was conducted by a foundation. And according to the results of the survey, 70% of Germans are of the opinion that Germany should not engage and shoulder more responsibility. This maybe has historical reasons, but may also very well be a reflex to the whole plethora and multitude of crises that people see at home when they watch TV in the evening. They see images that are shocking and worrying to them indeed.
Und ich glaube, die große Aufgabe, die Außenpolitiker in diesen Zeiten haben, ist zu erklären, anders als noch vor 20 und 30 Jahren gibt es eigentlich keine entfernte Krise mehr für uns. Alles hat Rückwirkungen auch auf unsere eigene Sicherheit in Europa und erst recht wir Deutschen als am meisten vernetztes Land in Europa leben auf keiner Insel.
And I believe this is the biggest challenge and task for practitioners in the field of foreign policy. It is their task to explain to people, unlike 20 or 30 years ago, the crises and challenges are not far away anymore. They have repercussions at home here in Europe. And we also must acknowledge the fact that we in Germany, with the ties and networks that we have, we don't live on an island or in isolation.
Das heißt, wir müssen erklären, der ganz natürliche Reflex, wenn wir uns raushalten, dann berührt uns diese böse Welt nicht. Wir müssen aufklären, dass dieser Reflex falsch ist. Wenn wir uns heraushalten und nur heraushalten, das zum Prinzip erklären, wird das die Sicherheitslage für uns alle in Europa negativ verändern.
So, we have to explain that the natural reflex to refrain and exclude ourselves from the things and will protect us from evil and bad things happening. No, indeed, the other way around, if we don't get involved and if we don't get engaged, well, the security situation in Europe will change for the worse and will deteriorate.
Und daran kann man leicht erklären, diese Aufgabe, die der öffentlichen Kommunikation über Außenpolitik, über Notwendigkeiten und Grenzen, die ist natürlich nicht mit dem Abschlussbericht des Review-Prozesses erledigt, sondern das muss jetzt umso engagierter weitergehen. Und das werden wir auch mit den Instrumenten, mit denen wir jetzt gearbeitet haben, im letzten Jahr weiter tun.
And this just to say that our task is not over. We need to communicate with the public and we need to explain our foreign policy. I mean, the process is not finished with the completion of this review process. We have to continue to do that with the instruments that we used in the past year.
Minister, you keep on stressing the overwhelming majority of Germans being kind of reluctant, not eager to embrace more responsibility for Germany. Does that mean that the leadership that Germany has exercised in the last couple of years, specifically also in the Ukraine crisis, and where it has exposed itself in ways that we hadn't seen before, that all of this leadership that you're also conducting and the Chancellor, that this is based on thin ice?
Ja, es ist jedenfalls eine große Aufgabe. Jemand hat mal gesagt, wenn ich eine Brücke über einen solchen Graben, 70%, die für mehr Verantwortung sind und 30%, die für mehr Verantwortung sind und 70% dagegen. Wenn ich sehe, wie breit der Graben ist, hat mir jemand gesagt, dann würde ich als Ingenieur keine Brücke darüber bauen. Aber wir können uns das nicht aussuchen. Die Welt hat sich verändert mit einer Vielzahl von Krisen und wir müssen uns in der Außenpolitik darauf einstellen, dass der Krisenfall eher der Normalfall sein wird und deshalb, ja, braucht man auch etwas wie Leadership und auf der anderen Seite hoffentlich das notwendige Maß an Überzeugungskraft.
Well, it is a big task and a challenge indeed. Someone said, if I were to bridge the divide between those two factions, 30% of Germans in favor of shouldering more responsibility, 70% of Germans against, looking at this very big divide, this big big gap. An engineer told me I wouldn't build a bridge, but in fact we cannot choose the things at hand. The world has changed dramatically. We're confronted with a multitude, a plethora of crises, and we as foreign policy practitioners have to acknowledge and accept the fact that crises will become the norm, a normal situation. So yes, we do need leadership, and we also need to convince people and use our convincing power in order to convince people.
One way of convincing people in Germany to do so, to do more, has traditionally been to embed it in the European narrative. And you have done that in your speech several times. You know, German foreign policy must be a European kind of exercise, as you've said. This comes as great, you know, it's a great message to the Brussels audience, obviously. But let me also ask a question here, because here in Brussels and in the wider European circles, also outside of Brussels, there has been a lingering feeling also that Germany has actually gotten quite happy with the situation of being the big, you know, the big boy in the room. That can lead and that can get away with stuff that in the past it didn't dare getting away with, that wasn't so much focused on the institutional approach, but much more on the intergovernmental approach, and wasn't just as much of a solidarity player in Europe as it used to be in the past. What would be your comment on this?
Ich habe von dem einen oder anderen Journalisten gelesen, der vor einiger Zeit über den deutschen Moment in der europäischen Politik gesprochen oder geschrieben hat. Ich habe das damals kommentiert und gesagt, in Deutschland sollten wir über solche Zuschreibungen gar nicht glücklich sein, weil wir haben nur etwas davon, wenn aus den deutschen Möglichkeiten ein europäischer Moment wird.
Some time ago, I read something by a journalist who talked about a German moment in European politics, and I commented on this statement, and I said, in Germany, we shouldn't be happy about this comment. We only are able to exploit our German opportunities if this turns in a European moment.
Ich glaube, die Skepsis speist sich eher aus der Feststellung, dass alle 28 europäischen Staaten nicht immer alles gleichzeitig und zur selben Zeit tun, insbesondere wenn es um Verhandlungen geht. Das Beispiel der Ukraine-Gespräche ist ja oft genutzt worden, um zu sagen, ist das eigentlich noch europäisch, was da stattfindet? Es gab auch skeptische Fragen, ob das Format, wie es gegenwärtig besteht, in Gestalt des Normandie-Formats, ob das ausreicht oder ob man das nicht erweitern muss. Da gibt es unterschiedliche Haltungen dazu. Ich kann nur für mich sagen, dass ich jedenfalls das, was ich getan habe und tue in diesem Zusammenhang, versuche in den Dienst der europäischen Bemühungen zu stellen. Will sagen, dass was ich tun kann, um Vorgesprächen, um Nachgesprächen zu informieren mit der hohen Repräsentantin oder mit der jeweiligen Präsidentschaft, das tue ich, damit gar nicht erst der Eindruck entsteht, hier wolle Deutschland etwas auf eigene Rechnung machen.
A lot of skepticism comes from the acknowledgement that 28 member states are not doing things all at the same time or simultaneously, especially when it comes to the realm of negotiation. The example of Ukraine is used when it comes to this, and questions are raised whether this is still European, what we're doing. Skepticism, we find, or we're confronted with skepticism when it comes to the Normandy format. People ask, does this suffice? Is it enough, or shouldn't the format or the setting of negotiations be expanded? There are differing views on this. I can only say that I try to do all that is possible in the service of European efforts. I inform the High Representative and the respective presidency on my talks and on my negotiations I held, so that the impression does not even arise that Germany would go it alone or do it alone.
Und es wird immer wieder Situationen geben, wo Einzelne für die Europäische Union als Ganze handeln. Wenn ich manche Aktivitäten, Engagements in Afrika sehe, da ist es selbstverständlich auch so, dass einzelne Mitgliedstaaten der Europäischen Union sich besonders gefordert fühlen, aber sich abstützen können auf eine gesamteuropäische Anstrengung, gegebenenfalls auch eine Mission.
And of course, there will be situations where it is necessary for individual actors to act on behalf of the overall European Union. If I look at sub-engagements or activities taking place in Africa, some member states of the European Union are called more into action, but they can always rely, of course, on the EU realm and on the EU level, be it, for instance, when it comes to missions and such.
Damit will ich nur sagen, nicht immer, wenn bei einem Problem nicht alle 28 handeln, ist das deshalb schon ein Handeln gegen gemeinsame europäische Interessen, sondern wir werden immer wieder auf Situationen stoßen, wo Einzelne Verantwortung aber im Namen der Europäischen Union übernehmen.
So I just want to say that not always all 28 member states work in cooperation. We will always see individual member states acting on behalf of European Union's interests.
I have one more question from my side, and I would like to accept 2 or 3 questions from the audience and perhaps more if time allows. One of the fields of activity where Germany has traditionally been quite active, and where you personally also have been quite active, was the relationship with Russia and what we used to call the modernization partnership. Mm-hmm. That was a German idea that became a European idea and even a European policy. And it seems today that this was no success, to put it mildly, and that the idea of modernization on the other side of that partnership wasn't just quite the same as the one that we had. And my question here now is, how can we find the right balance between a toughness that is not always popular at home and an openness that is equally not always popular with some of the harshest critics of the diplomatic approach? What's the right kind of approach in this kind of failed modernization partnership? How can we just turn it into a success in the long term and looking beyond the immediate crisis management?
Russland ist ein Anwendungsfall von Modernisierungspartnerschaft, die nicht geglückt ist, aber wir haben auch noch jüngere Beispiele in unserer Nachbarschaft. Nach den arabischen Erhebungen in Nordafrika hat sich Europa in gleicher Weise bemüht, dort unterstützend tätig zu werden, um durch Modernisierung der Gesellschaft, wirtschaftliche Entwicklung und Stützung der demokratischen Kräfte Modernisierungsprozesse in Gang zu halten oder vielleicht sogar nach vorne zu treiben. Der Erfolg ist in Nordafrika bescheiden geblieben und ich glaube, wir haben allen Anlass, insbesondere Tunesien, darin zu unterstützen, diesen Weg zu gehen. Was Russland angeht, haben Sie zweifellos recht und wir sollten uns nicht darüber freuen, finde ich, dass aus dem Ansatz der Modernisierungspartnerschaft, den ich in meiner ersten Amtszeit in Deutschland mitentwickeln geholfen habe und der dann in Europa ja ebenso vertreten worden ist. Es gibt da, glaube ich, keinen Anlass, sich darüber zu freuen, dass daraus nichts geworden ist. Und wir sind jetzt in einer Situation, bei der es erst recht schwierig ist zu sagen, ob wir in die Situation kommen, dieses oder Ähnliches für die Zukunft wieder aufzunehmen. Wir befinden uns jetzt in einer Phase des Ukraine-Konfliktes, in dem es nur darum gehen kann, die Eskalationen von Gewalt, die wir erlebt haben, nicht wieder aufleben zu lassen und aus der militärischen Beruhigung der Lage dann die Voraussetzungen dafür zu schaffen, dass man den politischen Prozess beginnt, der auch Teil der Minsker Vereinbarungen ist.
Russia is an example where the modernization partnership was not successful. There are more recent cases after the Arab Spring. Germany also fostered modernization.
Europe
fostered modernization, democratic processes in these countries, or helped help to keep the modernization process alive or make advances in the process, successes have been moderate. We need to continue to support Tunisia in its efforts. As far as Russia is concerned, you're right, and we shouldn't be happy, we shouldn't rejoice that the modernization partnership I helped bring about and develop in Germany in my first term in office, which also was then, of course, modeled after on the European level. We shouldn't be happy and rejoice that the modernization partnership did not work the way we hoped for. Today we're faced with a situation where it becomes difficult to say if we will have the opportunity again in future. Now we're entering, or we are currently in a phase of the Ukraine conflict where we have to make sure that violence doesn't escalate again. We need to make sure that the military situation is calming down in order to set the preconditions necessary to bring about a political process, which was also stipulated in the Minsk package, the Minsk agreements.
Aber wir sollten uns nichts vormachen. Der Prozess, in dem wir jetzt stecken, der Weg, den wir zu gehen haben, wird sehr lang sein. Vielleicht, wenn es glücklich läuft, gelingt uns die Beruhigung der militärischen Lage. Vielleicht gelingt uns die Einleitung eines politischen Prozesses. Aber ich glaube, ich übertreibe nicht, wenn ich sage, dass eine politische Lösung samt eines innergesellschaftlichen Versöhnungsprozesses innerhalb der Ukraine auch Jahre oder ein Jahrzehnt oder auch länger dauern kann.
We shouldn't fool ourselves. The process indeed will be very long. If we're lucky, and if we manage to succeed in calming down the military situation, if we manage to bring about a political process. But I don't exaggerate when I say that it could take years or decades or even longer for a political solution to come about.
Und was unser Verhältnis zu Russland angeht, wird viel davon abhängen, ob Russland den eben geschilderten Prozess steuert oder stört. Und daraus wird sich ergeben, ob sich daraus mit Russland wieder Beziehungen entwickeln, in denen zerstörtes Vertrauen des letzten Jahres wieder neu entsteht und Grundlage für Politik werden kann.
And as regards our relations to Russia, a lot, of course, depends on whether Russia will be steering or disturbing the political processes that I just talked about. The question will be whether we will be able to restore trust that has been shattered, and if we can bring about improvements in the relations with Russia.
Thank you very much. I now would like to open it to the audience. I had two fingers already, and there's a third one. I would like to collect these three if possible. I'd like to start with Mark Perini over here in the first row, then to Roland Freudenstein, who's there, and then a person who had the arm up exactly right there, somewhere in the middle on the right-hand side. Please, Mark.
Minister, one very specific question on Turkey. Turkey is today wavering between its European and Western anchor and something else. We can see that through NATO missile defense. We can see that on the Islamic State. We can see that through rolling back of rule of law. And yet Turkey is fully integrated to the EU through the customs union, industry-wise, still a candidate country, still holding democratic elections. So my question, Minister, is, are you worried about Turkey?
The next one is Roland.
Right. Thanks very much, Jan. I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Wilfried Martens Center, which is a think tank of the European People's Party. And Minister, I wonder what is wrong with calling a spade a spade. You were in the media recently reportedly criticizing NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe Breedlove for having allegedly exaggerated figures of Russian involvement in Ukraine. So maybe you can help me to understand what is wrong with naming the facts. And the other question, what are we doing? What good are we doing to Ukraine, to Russia, to ourselves by criticizing people who are publicly repeating what they have told the foreign ministers and the governments of the NATO member states? Exactly the same message. So I would like to know what is wrong with that. All right, let me explain in more detail. I didn't want to use much time, but I understand that there was a conflict of opinions between you and General Breedlove about him having reported figures of Russian direct military intervention in Ukraine. If that was completely invented, then I withdraw my question.
Yeah.
But I think there was a difference. So, question is, what's wrong with that?
I think we got that one.
Yes,
yes, please.
Georgi Gotev from Euractiv. It looks like in the United States there is almost bipartisan agreement that sending lethal weapon to Ukraine is an option. Is it a good idea today? And if not, if the situation deteriorates further, will it be a good idea tomorrow?
Thank you, Minister Steinmeier. This is why I took Mark Perini first, so that we would start with the Turkey question, not right away with the Ukraine question.
Ja, um mit der Türkei anzufangen. Wir haben ja lange diskutiert über die Frage, wie man mit ISIS umgeht. Und ich glaube, es ist auch mittlerweile nicht mehr sehr fruchtbar, lange darüber zu streiten, wer in der Vergangenheit eine nicht genügend entschiedene Haltung zu ISIS eingenommen hat. Sie alle kennen die Debatten und wer da für schuldig befunden worden ist. Das Entscheidende ist doch, dass sich im Verlaufe der letzten Monate und vor allen Dingen auf amerikanisches Betreiben bei dem Versuch, eine Anti-ISIS-Allianz zusammenzubringen, etwas verändert hat. Und wenn immer es in der Vergangenheit Unterstützung von irgendwem gegeben hat, so glaube ich doch, dass im Zuge der Debatten und der Informationen, die wir über ISIS zusammengetragen haben, unter allen Staaten, die beteiligt sind, die Türkei gehört dazu, die Gefährlichkeit fundamentalistischen Islamismus, wie ISIS ihn vertritt, gepaart mit mittelalterlicher Barbarei, was die Anwendung der Methoden angeht, gefährlich ist für alle Nachbarn, auch die Türkei.
Well, to answer the question on Turkey, first we had long discussions in the past on the question pertaining to how do we deal with ISIS. I believe that it is not conducive to actually continue to debate who in the past was not taking a not resolute enough stance against ISIS or not. You all know the debates, you all know who was blamed. It is crucial now that things have changed, and in the past months, I tried to forge an anti-ISIS alliance, and I believe that over the course of the debates, and now that we have received more and more information on ISIS, we, including Turkey, we all see the danger and the threat posed by ISIS by way of its fundamentalism, by way of its medieval-style barbaric acts, and these dangers are seen by all of us in Turkey as well.
Und ich kann nur hoffen, dass die Türkei den Annäherungsweg an Europa nicht aufgibt und in der Erwartung, die in der Türkei ja nach wie vor besteht, Kapitel der Beitrittsverhandlungen zu öffnen, auch die eigene Verpflichtung sieht, den Modernisierungsprozess im eigenen Land in der Türkei zu betreiben.
I can only will hope that Turkey will lend a contribution, and that also the expectations on the Turkish side to open further chapters as far as the accession process is concerned, that Turkey will continue on the path towards modernization.
Was die zweite Frage angeht, die sich auf die Debatte um Zahlenangaben im Ukraine-Konflikt treten, da ging es ja gerade nicht um Meinungen, sondern es ging eben um Fakten. Und der Anlass, dass wir zweimal nachgefragt haben bei der NATO, war eben der, dass aus unseren Quellen, und dazu gehören auch die OSZE-Quellen, die ja immerhin gespeist werden von denjenigen, die im Augenblick vielleicht noch nicht alles sehen, aber doch on the ground sind, dass die doch eben sehr stark abwichen von den Zahlen, die wir von der NATO bekommen haben. Da gab es Anlass, über den Grund des Abweichens der Zahlen zu fragen, in einer Situation, in der wir nach etwa 10 Tagen, nachdem die Unterschrift unter die Minsker Vereinbarung gesetzt waren, den Eindruck hatten, belegt durch die OSZE-Berichte, dass die Gewaltsamkeit erheblich abgenommen hatte, kam von Herrn Breedlove die Nachricht, dass sie dagegen erheblich zugenommen hat. Und Sie werden mir zugeben, dass das ein Anlass war, mal nachzufragen, woher sich die ganz andere Auffassung bei Breedlove speiste.
And as regards the second question pertaining to the figures in the Ukraine conflict, we're not talking about opinions here, we're talking about facts. The facts are an issue here. We asked twice at NATO, the reason being that our sources on the ground, US OSCE, have provided us with rather different figures than the figures we have received from NATO. And of course this gave us a reason for asking how these diverging figures came about. 10 days after the Minsk agreement was signed, we had the impression, and this impression was confirmed by OSCE figures, that violence and violent acts have decreased, whereas the figures we received by Breedlove have given reason to believe that violence has increased significantly.
Die letzte Frage nach der Haltung in den USA, das habe ich ja gerade jetzt in den Gesprächen in den vergangenen Tagen intensiv erlebt. Ich komme gerade Samstagmorgen zurück aus den USA, war 3 Tage dort, habe intensiv gesprochen mit der Administration auf der einen Seite, aber genauso intensiv auf dem Hill mit Senatoren ganz unterschiedlicher parteilicher Zugehörigkeit.
And as regards your question pertaining to the attitudes in the United States, I have just returned from my visit to the United States on Saturday. I spent 3 days in America. I held intense talks on the one hand side with the administration, but also very intensively debated on the Hill with senators of various political parties.
Das, was Sie referiert haben, bezieht sich, kann man cum grano salis unterstellen, bei einer Mehrzahl der Senatoren und sowohl republikanischen wie demokratischen. Ich habe Ihre Haltung so nicht wiedergefunden bei der Regierung. Auch in der Pressekonferenz hat John Kerry noch mal zum Ausdruck gebracht, dass Haltung der Administration ist, jetzt den Prozess nach der Minsker Vereinbarung zu verfolgen, sehen, ob es Fortschritte gibt in diesem Prozess, aber zum gegenwärtigen Zeitpunkt wird man innerhalb der Administration nicht über lethal weapons entscheiden.
And as far as the attitudes in the US, you mentioned, you also have to take that with a grain of salt. I met with Republicans and Democrats alike, but the attitudes you described are not the attitude or the position held by the national government. And Foreign Minister, Secretary of State Kerry said in his press conference that the position of the government is as follows. The government wants to continue to monitor the process after the Minsk agreements and see whether there is progress, but at present there is no decision to supply lethal weapons.
Thank you. I have a final question before you got to run, and that is a question that has to do with the year in which you entered into German federal politics. You had been involved at the state level for a long time, but in 1998, when Chancellor Schröder got into office, you entered the federal state level in foreign policy and politics in general. In that year, between 80 and 100 million people were born on planet Earth. They're now 16, 17 years old, which means that they can start to vote. and actively start to think about the prospects of their lives, I guess. What kind of leadership can Germany offer those 80 to 100 million people in various parts of the world?
Ich glaube, ich würde mich übernehmen, würde ich das für die jungen Menschen und jungen Generationen unterschiedlicher Länder auf allen Kontinenten sagen. Was Deutschland angeht, so werden bedauerlicherweise nicht genügend Kinder geboren. Das ist das erste Faktum, mit dem wir zurechtkommen müssen. Zweitens, mit Blick auf unser eigenes Land und einen auch nicht ganz anstrengungsfreien Prozess, den wir kurz nach 1998 hinter uns gebracht haben, mit Reformen, die genauso umstritten waren in Deutschland, wie sie in anderen Ländern umstritten waren, könnte ich zumindest im Augenblick sagen, ist der Boden bereitet für eine Jugend, die nach Lage der Dinge wahrscheinlich mehr Chancen hat als die Generationen vor ihr in Deutschland.
Well, I'm not in a position to speak for the millions of young people around the globe in the various countries and continents. As far as Germany is concerned, not enough children are being born into our country. Secondly, looking at our country, one also must bear in mind that we have initiated the process of reforms shortly after 1998, and I can say that the ground is prepared for a youth, a young generation, which has more opportunities than previous generations.
Und was die Außenpolitik angeht, so würde ich diese junge Generation gerne vor einer Fehlannahme schützen, die von uns Älteren oder manchen unserer Eltern immer wieder transportiert wird, mit Blick auf eine gegenwärtige Welt, die nicht ohne Gefahren ist. Schwingt oft mit, als ob die Welt früher, vor 1990, vor Ende des Kalten Krieges, einfacher, besser oder leichter gewesen wäre. Ich glaube, vor solchen irrtümlichen Annahmen sollten wir die Jugend schützen. Wir haben jetzt andere Gefahren, andere Aufgaben, mit denen wir zurechtkommen müssen, aber wir sollten nicht die Illusion nähren, als sei es früher sicherer oder besser gewesen.
And as regards foreign policy and foreign policy issues, I would like to protect the young people from an erroneous presumption in light of a world that is not without dangers and risks. It often seems that the world was easier in former times. We must protect our youth from believing that. Of course, the risks and the threats and the challenges are different, the challenges that we need to deal with today, but it is an illusion to think that the world was more secure or better or easier previously.
Thank you, Minister Steinmeier. I have between 80 and 100 million questions left, but unfortunately only about 80 seconds before you got to go. Thank you very much for coming over here, for making this one of the pit stops in your review 2014 process. And for giving us your time. I hope that we can invite you back and discuss some of the tougher issues also that are lined up for us, I guess, in the future. But in the meantime, travel safely wherever you're traveling. Enjoy the Belgian chocolates that we got for you, of course, as a thank you.
I'm staying here in Brussels for dealing with Iran.
All right, wonderful. I guess we can't match that one, so I hope that you enjoy that one as well. Thank you very much for coming over.
Thank you. Thank you.